All right, everybody. I am Frank Morano. By now, hopefully you know this. This is a special treat, not only for me, but for you. It's a special treat for me because I get to talk with one of the brightest legal minds in the world today. But it's a special treat for you because I had initially anticipated this being only a little bit of a bonus for our subscribers who made the wise decision to pay 99 cents a month. But I was having a little bit of a technical problem, and I can't figure out if that was because I was trying to make this only live for the subscribers. So, because I couldn't figure out if that was the genesis of the technical problem, it's live for everybody. So, this is a preview of what you would get if you made the wise choice to subscribe 99 cents a month and get exclusive interviews like this. Now, this is a real treat because we not only have one of the most successful and brightest criminal defense attorneys of the last 25 years, but someone who is outspoken with his opinions on absolutely everything. He does a podcast which is second to none. I listen to this podcast regularly, and whatever he's saying, whether I agree with what he's saying or whether I disagree with what he's saying, I end up saying, I can't believe he said that. He's one of our most popular guests on the radio. He's had, we may get into this a little bit, he's had a career on talk radio himself. He's represented every boldface name you can imagine, almost everybody. And if you have the money, I highly recommend that you consider hiring the one and only Jeffrey Lichtman. But whether you're in the mood for committing a crime or not, he's someone that certainly has a lot to say about a wide variety of issues. Jeff, it's great to talk with you. I know you got a lot going on. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Frank. That was such a good introduction, but it was kind of long and I was getting a little sleepy. I just had lunch.
All right. Hey, before we get into your views of some of the things going on in the world now, and there's a great deal, let me give folks a little bit of a preview of some of the cases that you've worked on. I got to know you about 20 years ago when you were representing John Gotti Jr. You got him this acquittal for securities fraud, the only acquittal he's gotten to date, and the rest of the charges resulted in a hung jury. A very high-profile case. One of the highlights was certainly your cross-examination of my friend Curtis Lewa. A lot of folks weren't familiar with you before that case. How did that relationship come to be? How did you come to be the lead attorney for John Gotti Jr.? A lot of folks would have said he might have picked somebody that was more of a household name among criminal defense attorneys at that time. Turned out he made a good choice for himself and presumably for you. How'd that come to be?
Well, he was being represented by Jerry Shargell, who I worked for from 1993 through 1999. Jerry had represented his father, had represented other people in the so-called Gambino family, and Jerry had represented John before on other things, John Jr., and he had a federal RICO case in Westchester at the time. And around this time, John would come to our office every single day pretty much because he was working on the case and he was a very hands-on client. I worked on the case a little bit, but not much back then. And this was the second time I had met him. I had met him when I worked on his father's appeal back in 1991, 92. And he was not an approachable guy back then. I mean, he was a little scary, not going to lie. And I was a kid. I was just out of law school. Fast forward 1999, I'm now a legitimate lawyer, if a very junior lawyer, and John would come every day and we started talking. And probably part of the reason why we became friendly was that I wasn't working on his case much. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like he was, needing me for help. We found out that we had a lot in common, boxing, American Indians. We had a lot of the same hobbies, a lot of the same interests, and we really hit it off, honestly. I remember visiting him after he had gotten arrested in Westchester at the Valhalla prison, Jerry and I was so taken aback by how much he had changed in the 6 years. He was chatty, he was friendly, he was kind, he was generous, he was decent. So I really became friendly with him. And at the end of that case, they were supposedly going to be going to trial, and they decided to take a plea. He was being pushed to take a plea, and John said, the only way that I'm going to take a deal is if I know that I'm never going to be indicted for the rest of my life on anything that I've done up to this point. Jerry, rest his soul, the best lawyer I've probably ever known, got him a plea agreement that purportedly gave him coverage, is what he called it. When I hear the word coverage, Frank, I still get the shakes, because it reminds me of back in 1999 when John Jr. wanted coverage. So he comes into my office and hands me the plea agreement and says, I want you to look at it and tell me if you, in your honest opinion, do you think I have real coverage? So I took it home that night. I read it and I came back. Now, Jerry was like my father. Anything that I have in this profession, I can, trace back to Jerry, either something that I learned or people that he introduced me to. And I loved him like a father. I probably was significantly closer to him than I was with my own father. But John came to see me the next day and he said, what do you think? And I said, look, you don't have coverage. I said, I think that you're going to get indicted again. And I hate to do this because Jerry's in the office next to me, but that's how I think it's going to go down. And I said, I don't want you to think I'm going against Jerry. You asked me for my honest opinion, and I'm telling you. Because John was a friend at that point, and I'm not going to take a company line and what if it doesn't work out? It's my fault. He's asking me for my honest opinion.
Right.
So he thanked me. He took the plea. He ended up getting, I think, 77 months in jail. And he said to me before he left, and I'll never forget, he said, if I ever get pinched again, I'm hiring a guy like you and not one of these older guys who I don't think, care about me the way you do. And I was like, yeah, right. Like, I'm sure you're going to hire me if you ever get arrested again. He goes to jail. And a few years later, there's rumblings that he's being investigated for, among other things, the Curtis Lewa shooting. I get a call from his sister, who is now a reality television star back then, growing up Gotti. And she says, John wants you to visit him in Raybrook. And I did. Visited him there. And he said to me, as soon as I sat down, and first of all, it was great to see him because I love the guy. And he said, remember what I told you the last thing before I went away? And I said, yeah. And I couldn't imagine it was the same thing. He said, you're my lawyer. I said, John, are you sure? Now, I have to be honest with you, Frank. I was scared shitless. I'm going to be, and this was, 2003. So it's 21 years ago. And this was not a minor case that I assumed was coming up. This was going to be a big one. And, I didn't know that I was ready for it, to be honest with you. But of course, I had to pretend that I was. And he hired me, and it was a lot of backstabbing in the legal community. Everybody wanted to represent him, and I was a young kid. I was in my 30s. But to John's great credit, he was loyal. And I grew into the job. I had another trial, a federal trial, a mafia case in that year, right after he hired me. And I did really well. And I realized then, you know what? I can do this. That's the hardest thing, Frank, when you're doing this for a living and you're a young lawyer. Just because you're smart, just because you know the law, just because you think you can do it, not everybody has it in them. And when I had this other federal trial in Brooklyn and I did really well, I was like, I can handle this case. And that's what happened. I ended up bringing Mark Furnish on to work with me. And the rest is history.
Indeed, it is. We could do a whole 2 hours just on that, and there's been mini series about it. You did a very interesting 90-minute YouTube video, which people could check out with some of your other recollections of the case. But I thought it would be helpful just for people to get a little bit of background on that. Now, the one thing that I associate with you is not being a rabid supporter of Israel. It's not being a commentator on politics or a legal analyst or a criminal defense attorney. The thing that I most associate with you is being a lover of dogs. And I remember you've told me the story many times about how you were in an accident, basically, or a victim of a crime, a vehicular assault, and you were laid up in the hospital, but the first thing that came to mind was what became of your dog, Calvin. So you're a dog lover's dog lover, if I've ever known one. I have been so eager to get your opinion on this story of Kristi Noem killing her dog Cricket, killing a goat, shooting it twice, making up a story about Kim Jong-un, making up a lot of other stories, and putting it all in her book. Give me your take on the story that she told, and give me your take on what kind of person would out themselves as a puppy murderer and actually put this in the book.
Well, there's a lot of things going on. First of all, I am a great lover of dogs, beyond anybody that I've ever known, frankly. I mean, my dogs don't stay alone. They have babysitters. What she did, look, she's on a farm. She's in South Dakota, one of the Dakotas, South Dakota. So I have some empathy for the fact that these are farm people and things are different than somebody like me who lives, in the city here. So I give her that benefit of the doubt that maybe she understands animals in a way. These are working animals. That being said, and I understand that the dog was difficult and came to her. She was the second home. The problem I have is the fact that she would have such poor judgment to think that this is sort of a hill to die upon, that you want to put this in your book. She has to know that there's a good 50, 60, 70% of the country that is completely nauseated by the story. Even if this was a rabid dog, the average American is like, you don't shoot your dog and you don't brag about it and think that it's, evidencing the fact that you can make difficult decisions. It makes you look like a fucking lunatic.
Yeah,
and that's really, can I say that?
Yeah, you can say, sure, okay. Go ahead, go nuts.
So it makes her look like a lunatic. And, my initial reaction was like, and no dog deserves that. The dog was like a year old or so. The dog could have been brought to some other place, but I'm not going to pass judgment. I try not to pass judgment on every last thing, especially, people's personal decisions. I'm not in her shoes, but what it told me is that she has an incredible lack of judgment, that she thought that was appropriate. And then she goes ahead and lies about meeting the leader of North Korea. I mean, it's so preposterous, the story. And I saw her on Jesse Waters. Somebody sent me a clip. I don't watch Fox. I don't watch any TV unless it's sports. And Jesse Waters, I guess that's his name, said there, did you ever meet Kim Jong-un? And that's classified. I can't talk about world leaders. You're the fucking governor of North Dakota, one of the fucking Dakotas. I don't know which Dakota, Frank. Doesn't make a difference. And you think that that the leader of this communist, dangerous country wants to meet with you? What are you going to try to get him to invest in your soybean farm? Like, they're all the rage in the Dakotas. It's a lie. Now, what Jesse Waters should have said, well, you're saying that it's classified, therefore you're admitting that you did meet him. Because if you didn't meet him, you would simply say, no, I didn't meet him. And she said, well, I can't discuss what I discussed with world leaders. Lady, you don't have to discuss what you discussed with world leaders. Just acknowledge whether you met him or not. She never met him. It's just I have a problem with this, what I'm going to bring up. I don't know if it's a bald-faced lie or a bold-faced lie.
Yes, that's always a controversial thing. Going back to,
I've got hair, so I'm going to say bald-faced lie because I'm not a particular fan of bald people. No offense to anybody who paid 99 cents a month, Frank, for your witticisms. If you're bald, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
So it tells me that she's got significant mental problems, and she should be nowhere near anything important. She shouldn't be near anything sharp, even a sharp object, let alone the White House. So I was repulsed on many levels with that.
All right. Last time you were on the radio, you said basically that you were going to be voting for President Trump, even though you didn't believe that he could win. And I kind of thought the reasons that you thought that were obvious, and I thought we had talked about it before, but apparently they weren't obvious, because I got a lot of pushback from listeners that said, you need to ask Jeffrey why he thinks Donald Trump can't win. Briefly, tell me why you think Trump is going to have a tough time winning.
Here's the problem with the average person with the way they think. Well, if you look at every poll, I mean, Biden is like the worst president that's ever lived. Every single poll at this point puts Trump ahead of him, despite all of Trump's issues. Nobody is less popular than Joe Biden is at this stage of his first term. So by all intents and purposes, he should get crushed in this election. But elections don't go based on polls. They don't go based on what the sentiment is in the country. It's who gets the vote out. It's who's capable on that one day, on that sliver of time, of getting the vote out. The Democrats have done a much more significant job. I mean, the Republicans with that, what's his name, with that Romney woman, she's buying fresh flowers and getting fillers for her lips and her face It's like, lady, you've got like no money left. You've raised no money, and they've raised like $1 trillion. What do you think they're doing with that money? In addition, there's going to be buses. They're going to be emptying out building after building in every one of these, the handful of states that matter, the battleground states. There's like 6 of them. That's all that matters, because every other state's already been decided. They're going to get the vote out. In addition, they've got the write-ins. The write-ins, for some reason, Frank,
the mail-ins, you mean?
The mail-ins, excuse me.
Yeah.
Every time I say that, you correct me because I'm always wrong. I've noticed that, the mail-ins. For some reason, every time there's a poll on an election night, an important election, the Republicans are ahead, and then 6 hours later, 10 hours later, wouldn't you know, they found more of these mail-ins. So I have no doubt why is it that you need to have a license to drive, Frank? If you want to pick up your welfare check, you need to have an ID. If you want to get some fucking cough syrup, you got to have an ID in the Piggly Wiggly in the pharmacy section. But when you vote, Frank, no, we don't want. Because it's racist. It's racist if you have to show an ID. You can get public assistance. You need to show the ID, but voting, no. So I have no doubt that there's going to be much elation on election night with all the Trumpers, and then it's going to be like that Price is Right. If you have that sound effect, the losing horn when he loses. He's losing the election. If he wins, I'd be absolutely stunned. There's no question in my mind.
But just so I'm clear, so you think primarily the reason that he's not going to win is because of the possibility of voter fraud, or because his personality has alienated people in some of these swing states, or is it both?
Well, I think it's both, because I think if you had a more likable, less divisive, less polarizing candidate, I don't think that the mail-ins would make a difference. But you got a guy like Trump who's got a tremendous amount of baggage. And, I have some empathy for him because he's a criminal defendant in 4 different cases. I feel like he's been unfairly charged in most of them. So I do have some empathy for him. But it would be nice, Frank, if once in a while, I don't know, maybe 1 out of every 50 public comments he makes is about something beside himself and about how unfair it is and how sad. The country is burning right now. The country is burning. Every college campus is burning. And Trump is concerned about, the air conditioning is a little cold. I think they're trying to make me uncomfortable inside the courthouse. It's painful because I recognize that it's very important for our country that he wins. I don't like him, but I have to say, compared to the other guy, I mean, you literally need, you don't just need to have your head examined, Frank. I mean, you need to be heavily medicated, put out so they can do brain scans. They can fly in a full team from Vienna to poke you. What's wrong with you? How could you possibly think that the country is going well? And I don't like Trump. I know he's going to disappoint me. I know he's not going to do enough. I know he's going to fight with morons on Twitter, but I know that he's at least going to close the border, which has been a disaster for the country. He's going to try, hopefully do something with the college campuses and the anti-Semitism, although he did nothing during the 4 years that he was in power. And certainly a lot of the anti-Semitism and the lunacy and the public unrest after the George Floyd situation, he didn't do anything. I know he's going to disappoint me, but I am firmly of the belief that Joe Biden is going to destroy what's left of this country if we give him 4 more years. And it won't probably be Joe Biden. It'll be that Kamala or that Pete
Buttigieg, right?
Buttigieg, whatever his name is. It'll be some leftist maniac will be in charge, and then we're really going to screw the pooch.
All right. If people have comments or questions, they could type them in the comments here, and we'll try and get to as many of your comments as we can. You mentioned the Trump trial. Obviously, there's this case going on in Manhattan now. It was very interesting on Friday when Hope Hicks testified. There were 2, she started crying, and there were 2 totally competing narratives as to why she started crying. There was the, Fox News Newsmax narrative, which had her crying because she was so touched by Donald Trump's relationship with his wife and, reflecting back on the good old days. And then there was the CNN, MSNBC narrative, which had more to do with the fact that she realized that she had sunk Donald Trump's case. In my view, this is a textbook example of why we should have cameras in the courtroom and allow anybody that wants to watch this trial to watch it for themselves and draw their own conclusions. Where do you come down on the issue of cameras in the courtroom?
It's funny. When I was a young lawyer, there was a murder case in California with two brothers that owned a pornography empire. They did the movie Behind the Green Door, which was a famous porn movie from the 70s. And my boss at the time was representing them on many First Amendment issues. And until one of them killed the other one, and then he represented the killer. And I wrote the motion to keep the cameras out of the courtroom. And it was a very big case. It was 1991, maybe. And I won. I ended up winning that. And the group that tried to get it on TV was Court TV at the time. And the reason I remember that I felt is that there was potential for witnesses to be playing up, perhaps their testimony because they're looking for an opportunity to become famous. They may not be as careful with the truth if they've got other competing things on their mind. And that was back in 1991. It's 2024 now. Social media is so big, that some witness is going to try to embellish their testimony to make themselves perhaps more important than they are. It's a risk. I understand your point well, that the public, just like with Supreme Court arguments,
Right.
That's recorded and you can hear that. I don't think it, for me, I wish that it was, all the trials are televised, because frankly, I'd like to see some of my trials after. Like, it's very different when you're doing them. You can't really appreciate. I'd like to see it for my own knowledge so I can see what I can improve upon. But I think that in terms of what's fairness for a defendant, and that really comes first, I don't think it's helpful. I think
Really? Okay.
it's fraught with too much danger.
All right, so let's talk about this Trump trial. It looks like the judge, Juan Merchan, was very, very frustrated with Trump continuing to violate the gag order, said he violated the gag order 10 times, and indicated that he was fining him $1,000 and that he basically threatened to throw him in jail if he continued to violate the gag order. Before we get to the facts of the case itself and the evidence that's been, coming out so far, do you think Trump has been in violation of this gag order?
Well, I mean, look, the things that he said are really, if they're going to be inappropriate at all, it's only because he's got such a following. He's so famous. The average person says these things, and it's like,
Who cares?
Tree falls in a forest and there's no one around to hear it. If he's technically in violation, he's technically in violation, even if it's unfair, the gag order that's on him. Sometimes in the courtroom, you have to abide by what a judge says, even if you don't agree with it. Even I do sometimes, although not all the time, to be completely frank. But I think that he has been probably in violation. But what are you going to do? Trump wants to go to jail. He compares himself to Nelson Mandela. I think did he compare himself to Jesus Christ?
I think so. I know Eric Adams has. I get all these guys confused. Yeah.
Well, they're similar. Yeah. But what is the judge going to do? You're going to put him in jail? Really? He's going to have the Secret Service with him. I think the judge is way too uptight about this. I think it could be handled in a better way. I don't know what the way is, because Trump really does want to get put in jail because he wants to be able to tell, look what they're doing to me. Look what they're doing. He wants to become a martyr. It's a tough situation for the judge, because why should he be treated differently than the typical other defendant? It's not right.
I've seen you do a number of cross-examinations in the Gotti case, in El Chapo, and really, you've got cross-examination down to an art form. And I'm trying to figure out who you would rather be cross-examining, Stormy Daniels or Donald Trump, because I could see you having a lot of fun with either of them as witnesses. Let's talk about Stormy Daniels. Looks like she's testifying, and she's really kind of the linchpin of this whole Manhattan case, because it's these hush money payments to her, coupled with the supposed filing of false records and the attempts to influence an election, that make this a felony rather than a misdemeanor. What do you see coming out of a Stormy Daniels testimony? From what you know of her, is this somebody that would be viewed as credibly by the jury? And how damaging would her testimony be to Trump?
Well, I think, as a defense lawyer, I think you have to be careful because it is a woman, and juries get upset if you beat the hell out of a woman on a stand. It's got to be done with a little more delicacy. But I think as a defense lawyer, what I'd be wanting to get out is the fact that basically you're a prostitute, and you had voluntary sex with Trump. You didn't do it for money. You did it because you wanted to have sex with him. Nobody put a gun to your head. And then you decided when he was running for president that you could make some money by extorting him. And, you can say, well, I wasn't extorting him. He was famous and I just wanted to tell my story. No, you extorted him. You blackmailed him because you thought you could get money because he's an important person who was running for president. And you felt that if the story came out that he had sex with a hooker, what is she, a porn star? Whatever.
Right, adult film star, yeah.
Same thing. And, sex for money. So you thought you could get some money out of him. And that's really what you did. And you asked for a number. And that's why after you were paid that money, you lied on television and said that this is not true. You lied because you were protecting the money that you extorted from President Trump. And what I would use her for is to take away any suggestion that the reason why Trump lied about the payment, 130, Frank?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Is not because he was trying to violate the federal election law, but because he was trying to pay off a hooker who was extorting him. And he was embarrassed about what he did. And he figured, you know what, I'm getting extorted. I'm going to pay it because I want to keep this quiet because it's going to be bad for me on many levels. And I, in a lot of ways, look, again, that I'm not a Trump fan.
Mm-hmm.
But the guy was a crime victim almost. It's pretty
Right.
close to being, it's not right. It's not right. And the other woman that he had sex with is Karen McDougal. Same thing.
That seems like it was a little different because it seems like that was not just a one-time thing. It seems like they had a long-term relationship.
But to try to monetize it later, it's not just monetizing it, but it's, I want you to pay for my silence. Otherwise, I'm going to make money off of the fact that I had sex with you. It's just so gross that I think that there are going to be people on the jury, men, women, not just one sex. They're going to be like, you know what? This isn't right what happened to Trump. Maybe he fudged the documents, but he didn't do it for any reason other than the fact that he was getting extorted by these two women. And so I think that's what wins the case.
Repeat that?
I think that's what will win the case for the defense. I think it's very possible he's going to be convicted of the misdemeanor, but I don't think they'll reach any conviction of him on the felony.
Shelley, one of our loyal subscribers, has a question. What does Jeffrey think of having the two attorneys on the jury? Is that a good thing? Great question. What do you think?
It depends on the type of case. If it's a case where you want the jury to be intelligent, then you want as many attorneys that you can get on.
In this case,
I think it's probably okay. In a lot of my cases where there's absolutely no chance to win, unless I can bamboozle a juror, I don't necessarily want many attorneys on, unless it's an attorney that I think I can somehow, reach. But, it's another question. If I can answer another question that was not brought up, one of my incredible pet peeves about this trial, and it's not a very long case. I mean, the case is going to last a month of trial, Frank. It's, what are we on, day 8, I think?
Mm-hmm.
It's not even it's going to be half a month of a trial. Why is it in a simple case like this that the defense lawyers are splitting the cross-examinations? It's something that drives me out of my mind, is selfish, is lazy, and is stupid. Because by splitting up, I think there's 3 different lawyers that have been cross-examining, which means when there's a summation that's given in this case, and you are begging for this man's life, now maybe not in this case, I don't think he's getting jail time regardless, but oftentimes you're begging for somebody's life. Do I really want to have my time in front of the jury split up into 3s because I'm too lazy to do the work? It's outrageous, and Trump doesn't know better because he just simply doesn't understand. But it's amazing to me that that somebody there didn't say, slow down.
You know, I'm so glad that you mentioned that because that's the kind of thing that only a trial lawyer would really think of. And as many trials as I've watched, I wouldn't think of it. But when you're before the jury doing this cross-examination, you're developing a relationship with the jury, and that's diminished if it's divided by three and there's a little bit less of a connection come summation time.
A hugely less of a connection. When
Mm.
you're in front of the jury and you're asking questions of a witness, there are things that you see and feel that you can't get when you're sitting 30 feet away at the defense table. You can see who's laughing with you. You can see who's looking at you. You can see who's turning away because they hate you so much, they can't stand you. And you understand who you need to play to during the summation. The reason in my mind that we lost the El Chapo case, and that was the first trial that I had lost in 11 years, Frank, in 11 years, where I didn't get a hung jury or an acquittal. The reason why we lost, and the jury was out for 7 full days, which is an incredibly long time in a trial where supposedly the evidence was so overwhelming, is that Chapo insisted upon hiring 3 lawyers. He made me the lead one, but he couldn't get me on the case until a couple of months before the trial. So I came on and I immediately took over. I did the opening, I did the summation, I did 2 of the more important, 2 or 3 of the more important cross-examinations, but there was like 14. Had I been hired at the time that I wanted to be hired, and whether he was capable of hiring me without getting me indicted for some kind of tax fraud or something like that, I would have been able to do all the witnesses, and I would have insisted. I would have wanted to do more work. Why? Because I want to win the case, Frank. I'm not there because I just want to do one of the witnesses because it'll be so fun to be the El Chapo's lawyer where I'm crossing a witness. No, we're here to win. Shut up, help me with the case, but I'm here to win, and I want to be in front of that jury every single minute that I can.
With El Chapo, though, let's say you got to call your own plays, and that case was managed as you would have liked it in terms of lawyering and cross-examination, etc. I mean, don't you think the case was, in some respects, such an unwinnable case that even in spite of your best efforts, the result probably would have been the same?
No.
No.
I don't care how bad the case. Listen, everybody thought that way about the Gotti case. His
Right.
uncle had just lost in the same building with the same prosecutors a year before with much of the same charges, and he got squashed like a bug. You know, if you're the kind of person that goes into a case like this, I don't care what the case is, and most of my trials are unwinnable. You know, I don't get hired for a case where it's a 50-50. If you're the kind of person that thinks you're going to lose, you're in the wrong business. I actually thought that I was going to win, Chapo, and I remember saying this to him, and I say this to every client when they hire me for a case that's going to go to trial. I say, look, I don't know where we're going with this defense yet, but I'm telling you this. If after I do my summation in the case, you're not convinced that you're going to win, you tell me and I'll give you the feedback.
Wow.
The full thing. And I told Chapo that as well. And he was like, man, I'm going to win. Now, the problem is that once we started doing cross-examinations in the Chapo trial, I get called to see him during a lunch break. And he says to me, I'm firing one of the lawyers and you're going to do all of his crosses. And I'm like, Chapo, what? I said, we're in the middle of the trial. This isn't like 3 months before where I can get this work done. For me to do a cross, it takes me 3-4 weeks usually to do it the way I want it, to prepare for it. I mean, these cross-examinations are 150 pages of notes sometimes. I mean, I'm very, very careful. You saw how I was with Curtis and how I was with everybody else in the Gotti trial. Everything is very carefully laid out. Every eventuality is thought of. A lot of it's on my feet, but a lot of it is not on my feet. And I can't just walk in and start cross-examining. It may appear that it looks easy, that I'm doing this and it's fun and it's easy, because I hope that I make it look that way, because I'm so over prepared. And that's why I can make it look that way. But the amount of preparation it's astronomical. So I said to him, look, I can't do, these other 5 witnesses that this guy had. I told you that he was incompetent. I told you that he was an idiot. I told you that he was bald. No, I didn't say that part, because both of the other lawyers were bald. So I didn't want to. Anyway, what I said to him is, I said, look, you should have listened to me. I understand you're fighting for your life. You want me to do the summation as well. I'll do 2 more of the witnesses. I'll take 2 of them. And the way I had to work on them, Frank, is I'm sitting at the trial all day, 4 days a week. And at night when I get home, I'm working on a cross-examination of another witness, and I have other cross-examinations that I need to work on that I've already done for the most part. I was working, 18 hours a day. It was ludicrous. But, when you're fighting for somebody's life, you keep your shit together.
It's funny. I asked you about 17 years ago, or maybe more, what the key to being a good criminal defense attorney, a good trial criminal defense attorney was. And that was the first thing you mentioned is preparation. And I've asked that question to almost every criminal defense attorney that has any sort of reputation. And they all basically say almost exactly what you just said, that the 4, 5, 6 hours that you see in the courtroom is in some cases a manifestation of 6, 7, 8 months of work. And I think that's one of the areas where a lot of prosecutors really fall short, because so few of these cases go to trial. They really don't know how to cross-examine, especially in the federal system, because all these cases end up in pleas. But lastly, on the Trump front, one of the big pieces of drama seems to be whether or not he's going to testify. I have to think if you were Trump's lawyer, there's no way that you would have him testify in this case.
No way. I mean, you could. I would not be impressed with the prosecutor's ability to cross-examine for a variety of reasons, a couple that you mentioned. But I think Trump is too out of control. He doesn't take direction from his lawyers. He does what he wants. He doesn't understand the law. The judge is out to cut his throat. It's just too dangerous, Frank. And I don't think you need to. I think you can win the felony charge in this case without him having to testify. I remember sitting, I don't know if you were in the courtroom then, but when we were done with the government's case in Gotti, and the judge is like, does your client want to testify? And we had prepared him some, and he thought that he might, and I had to go in the back by myself, I remember. The other lawyers were sitting at the defense table, and he was in a cage behind, inside the courtroom, but behind the door. And I said to him, what do you want to do? I said, we got to make a decision now. We're ready to go. I've got a direct written up. We're ready to go. What do you want to do? And John did the one thing that I hoped that he wouldn't do. He said to me, you know what? You're trying the case. I trust you. You do what you think is best.
Wow.
And I said, wow, that's putting a lot of pressure on me. And I said, I think we're doing enough to win the case. I said, I don't think you need to testify, because it opens up a potential disaster. Now, John is obviously, would have been much more prepared than Trump, because John also would have followed the rules. Trump wouldn't. And it's just too dangerous. And I don't think you need it. I don't think, the defense that I just laid out for you about the fact that he's a crime victim, that alone defeats the felony, as long as you can get it out. You got to get it out of these two women. I don't think it's very difficult. I mean, why else do you want the money? Because you had sex with him. You wanted to get paid for the sex, and you knew that you had something you could dangle over his head. It's a classic blackmail. That's what you do when you're trying to blackmail somebody. And I think that comes out, and I think people listen to it and they're like, you know what? This is not right. And they don't find him guilty. They may not find him guilty on the misdemeanor. If you get one Trump fan in the jury, they're not going to vote to convict, even if they think he's guilty. That's just how it is.
Well, so do you think one of the things that a lot of the pro-Trump media has raised is that they think it's impossible for him to get a fair trial because the jury consists of Manhattan people? Trump's basically tweeted that same thing. Now, Manhattan is Democratic, but it's not 100% Democratic. Do you think, the political leanings of Manhattan notwithstanding, that you can get a fair trial with a Manhattan jury?
When I hear that kind of excuse, you know what that tells me, Frank? It tells me that you're a loser. It tells me that you're already preparing to lose, and you're already crying about what happened to you. Listen, you think it's easy to represent a Gotti in New York City? Back then, before, he's maybe been thought of as somebody not as dangerous. I mean, he was charged with some pretty ugly shit, right? They convicted his uncle in 2 seconds. They convicted his father in 2 seconds, finally, at the end. The jury said, when we picked him, we all think that he's guilty. We all think that he's part of the mafia, but we're willing to keep an open mind. That's what they said. I respectfully, I think that representing a Gotti or an El Chapo or somebody accused with murdering a 7-month pregnant woman by doing a bad abortion and cutting every corner, I would think that those people are disliked more by a jury. So I don't want to hear that we couldn't get a fair jury. People take their jury duty very seriously. Even if these people are bums and they're not working, when they get elevated to a situation where you're judging another man like that, they take it seriously. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't care who's on the jury. I don't care if it's 12 far left lunatics. I can convince somebody not to convict.
The talking about the bringing in prior bad acts in a lot of these people that have, whether we're talking Gotti, whether we're talking El Chapo, whether we're talking Trump, there's always an issue. There's always a battle over how much stuff that's uncharged to let in. This became an issue recently in the Harvey Weinstein case because the judge in that case let in all sorts of testimony about crimes that he wasn't charged with. Ultimately, the New York State Court of Appeals, in a very close decision, chose to overturn that conviction. A lot of people are very upset about this because they think Harvey Weinstein's a very evil guy, raped all sorts of people, and that, of course, there should be testimony permitted about some of these other bad things that he did. From your perspective, do you think the Court of Appeals made the right decision? And when there's a retrial in that case, how would you handicap that?
Well, first of all, it was back during the Me Too movement. So there was a lot of pressure, I suppose, on the judge to let in the kitchen sink, which is what the judge did. I did not think that was a very strong rape case. Every single one of those women, just about, or at least many of them, I went to his room. I wanted to curry favor. I kind of wanted a part in a movie. You had Governor Newsom's wife who basically was sending him, kissy face messages after he supposedly raped her. Everybody wanted something from the guy. And that's just how that profession is. Hollywood is like that. Sometimes you have to sleep your way to the top, I suppose. And that's what these women thought. I actually thought that he wasn't going to be convicted at that trial. I felt that if the trial was done correctly, and I met with Harvey leading up to that, and I actually liked him because you don't view somebody that you're meeting potentially represent. You don't start judging them based on what they're accused of. You judge them on how they treat you, because otherwise, how would I represent anybody? Sure. And I'm here to give somebody their constitutional rights. I'm not here to be some fucking crank who's going to decide, you can't do this, you can't do that. This is how you're supposed to live. This is how you have to live. It's always some leftist asshole who's telling you, no, you can't do that. It's not right. This is how you treat women.
I think there's plenty of conservatives that are pretty judgmental about people they meet as well. They're in that high horse of being puritanical. But that's
so I actually thought that he was going to win the trial. I felt that had the trial been done correctly, I thought that he would win. I thought that the judge let in way too many of the Molyneux acts, which is what many lawyers in New York, defense lawyers, I don't know many defense lawyers that felt that what the judge did was correct. Almost all of us thought that there was going to be a reversal, but I think a lot of people felt that the political pressure, the public pressure, would stop him from getting the conviction reversed. Now that it's all these years later, I mean, it's like, 5 years later, there's no longer the hysteria, the Salem witch trial hysteria that there is now. I think he wins the case. I mean, really? You're not going to bring in, much of this Molyneux. A lot of these women, there's plenty of issues with regard to their credibility. And listen, let me tell you, as a defense lawyer, I certainly can still understand that when women are raped in a situation where it's, I wouldn't call it a date rape situation, but an acquaintance rape situation, and especially when you're in that business, the first thing you're doing is not running to the police. The idea that that's like some kind of like major win for the defense. Look, people are human, and you don't want to be running to the police and outing this guy back then because you think it's going to ruin your career. So I have empathy for these women, but as a defense lawyer, I also realize that I'm there to win the case, and they had a lot of credibility issues. They're talking to him after, they're writing to him, Harvey, I love you. Listen, that's not how you speak to your rapist. It's not how a lay person believes that's how you speak to your rapist. It may be psychologically, I know they put in psychological evidence that that's what women do in a situation where they know they're rapists. I get it. But the average guy off the street in New York City, Frank, who's going to be in this jury, they want the rape to be a rape in order to send somebody away for life. They don't want to hear, smoochy, smoochy, kissy face. I can't wait to see you again, Harvey.
Right.
We had so much fun. Nobody believes it.
So it sounds like, needless to say, you think the Court of Appeals made the right decision in vacating the conviction.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it became the tail that wagged the dog in that case. The Molyneux evidence, the bad act evidence, became the trial. It was a trial within the trial. It was too much. If you want to put in one piece, it's got to be something very similar to what he's charged with. And it became too many acts. And it became that you're starting to convict him just because you think, well, he did, he has to be guilty because all these people are coming in. It was too much.
I can't tell if the picture frame behind you, I see some family pictures and stuff like that. I can't tell if the picture frame behind you is a signed photo of the Ultimate Warrior. Is that, in fact, the Ultimate Warrior?
That is the Ultimate Warrior, and it's a very rare doll.
Okay. It's a doll. Okay. So now for people that don't know, you were the Ultimate Warrior's attorney. Here is a screen grab from the A&E biography on the Ultimate Warrior. And you're clearly a very young Jeffrey Lichtman is featured behind him there. And you were the Ultimate Warrior's attorney. I got to speak with the Warrior once when I was producing your radio show. Oh, look, he signed that and everything. That's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. It says, Jeff, my longtime good friend, you are the ultimate warrior lawyer, always warrior. I love the guy like a brother. I mean, you're right. He was on the radio when you were producing back then, and he gave me a bunch of stuff, including many of these dolls. These dolls are really valuable now, if you can believe. I mean,
he's one of these guys that is pretty polarizing, not only for some of the things that he said regarding homosexuals and others, but he's polarizing within the wrestling community. He's one of these guys one of these wrestlers that a lot of the experts on pro wrestling never thought was really that good of a wrestler and was sort of over pushed by Vince McMahon. But, in that documentary, I thought his wife and his daughters really humanized him. What was he like on a personal level? He seems, needless to say, a little odd.
I don't think he was odd. I mean, I called him Jim. Even after he officially changed his name to Warrior, I called him Jim. That was his real name, and that's how I know him. He was the first client that I ever got on my own, the first client that ever paid me to represent him. I love the guy. He was insane. He made me crazy. He was incredibly difficult at times to deal with, but there was something very endearing about him, Frank. He had this laugh that was the most evil genius laugh you've ever heard. It was so evil, but so funny. He was one of the funniest people I've ever known. And when he died, I texted his phone. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that he could be dead because he was so full of life. And there were so many funny things that I heard out of his mouth over the years that still make me laugh, 30 years later. I mean, I think he hired me 1992 or so, or 93. He just was, when he liked you, he liked you. When he hated you, he hated you. And we had some fallings out, he and I, but we always came back to each other because, he saw me grow. I mean, I was a very young lawyer, and he hired a famous lawyer to represent him on some things. I ended up leaving the office and going to work for Jerry Shargell. And Jim calls me up. He's like, I'm coming with you. I'm like, Jim, I'm not taking any clients. I want to keep my relationship with, the guy that I was leaving. He said, look, I'm not staying with him. I'm like, he's a famous lawyer. What do you want me? I'm 27 years old. What do you want from me? He says, you're a better lawyer. And I'm like, I'm not taking you because I'm not going to burn that bridge. He's going to kill me if I take you. And it wasn't like the biggest case. He says, look, how about this? I fire him and then I come to you. I said, I don't want you to do that. And I took him. And I never was any big fees or anything. It was minor stuff. But I really enjoyed him. I learned a lot representing him because I learned how to understand clients, how to get clients to do what I wanted them to do when I needed them to do things. And I miss them. I was just thinking an hour ago about some people that I missed. One of them was Jerry Shargell, obviously, and Jim is another one. Every single time we spoke on the phone, Frank, we were laughing so hard that I thought I was going to have a heart attack. That's how it was with him, because we really thought alike. He got a little weird there at the end. He became very homophobic. And his points were sort of like, I understood. If you remember when we did the radio show with him, we were like, Jesus Christ, man, you can't say that on WABC. You can't do it. You can't do it. You just can't. And he said to me, look, homosexuality, if it was right, then, you'd be able to have kids when you have gay sex, because without, people getting pregnant and having children, the world ends. And I was like, in some way, it kind of made sense. Now, I'm completely, liberal when it comes to social issues. As you know, I'm pro-choice. I love the gays, and I'm, for some gun control, and I have lots of guns. But in a kind of basic logic sense, it kind of made a little bit of sense, even though I do believe that homosexuality is not, a sin.
Can you describe a little bit of the relationship between he and Vince McMahon? McMahon is obviously in some trouble now, pushed out by his own companies on the receiving end of this lawsuit. We don't need to get into that. There's apparently even a federal criminal investigation, but it seemed like he had a very unique relationship, the Warrior, with Vince McMahon. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was around when I brought Jim back to the WWF. It was WWF back then. In the early 90s, I'm the one that worked on the contract, and I was the one that had to deal with the fallout of the steroids and all that stuff. And I was around when Vince went on trial for the steroids, for passing out the steroids to the wrestlers. I would say that I would compare their relationship, a father and son, when the son wants to kill the father, and really he wanted to kill him, but at the same time he loved him. And it's hard for me to really explain, but I think he was always trying to prove to Vince that he was worthy of being Vince's son. He always felt that Vince was screwing him, and he wanted to show Vince that he was capable of achieving on his own without Vince.
Understood. You do this great podcast. I listen regularly. It's called Beyond the Legal Limit. People can search that in any podcast app, and it comes right up. There's a lot of great stuff there. You told a story on that podcast one time where you got a call from a childhood friend, basically, that led to you representing a man convicted of molesting 4 young boys. And we don't need to get into the details of the case specifically, but it ended with the man being released from prison after a brutal courtroom examination, which caused the judge to vacate the conviction mid-questioning. Now, that's the kind of thing that usually only happens on television, doesn't usually happen in real life. But representing someone like that, or somebody that's a drug dealer or a murderer, I'm sure you've gotten these questions 100 times, of the questions of conscience, where if you do your job well, you're helping somebody that is either a bad person or has done very bad things be free and go out into the world. Obviously, I recognize that there's an important constitutional role in doing that, but I am shocked at how often people raise that question of, how do you represent someone like that? I'm sure you got the question quite a bit on that case. Address that for folks. Do you ever wrestle with your own ethics, your own morals in helping these kind of folks get free?
I mean, they're coming to us because they have a constitutional right to a fair trial. So what am I going to do? Throw a trial because I don't like the defendant? Because I don't like what he's accused of? I mean, I'd obviously be in the wrong profession. Anybody who gives me a hard time for that, respectfully, is an idiot. Because they're basically saying that this great country that we live in, we have the greatest judicial system in the world. Well, I'd rather live in Iran. I want them to have their heads chopped off. I want them tossed off a building. Again, it's always some asshole who, is, passing judgment. Go fuck yourself. You're accused of a crime. The Constitution allows a lawyer, allows a zealous legal defense, requires a zealous legal defense. You don't get to pick and choose which one of the amendments that you like.
Right.
I like this one. It's so special, but this one, I don't like this one. So I'm going to get very angry when somebody tries to give someone their constitutional right. Listen, go fuck yourself. When you need me, though, because you've been sued or you've been arrested, you're going to be on your knees begging like a seal for some help. Sorry. I'm there to provide a service. I'm here to give someone their constitutional rights. And respectfully, Frank, I don't know many people that are listening to this today or are going to listen to it tomorrow that actually spend their days upholding the American Constitution. That's my job, and I take it seriously. So if people are upset by it, I don't care. You want to threaten my life? Go ahead. Come and find me. It's not hard to find me. I'm not going to back down. You want to fight? You're going to get a fight if you hire me. I'm not going to be looking to curry favor with prosecutors or looking so that nobody hates me in society. You want to fight? I'm going to give you a fight to the death, and you're going to wish that you had a lawyer like me when that happens, because that's what everybody deserves. Even people I don't like. I don't like every client that I represent, Frank, but I got to work as hard as I can and try to win the case. And if I do win the case, it's not don't be mad at me. Be mad at the prosecutor who dropped the ball. Mm-hmm. Don't be mad at me. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do.
You've been very generous with your time. Stick with me a few more minutes. I got to ask you about P. Diddy.
I actually got to go to another call, but real quick.
Okay. P. Diddy's sons hired you. I know there was a lot of talk of Sean Puffy Combs being investigated, having his house raided, himself. What's going on with the sons, and what's happening with that case? A lot of folks very, very curious where that whole thing is at the moment.
Well, I mean, look, they were way too heavy-handed in going to the mansion and putting guns, pointing it at the heads of the kids. The kids are not accused, even in any capacity, of having guns and being dangerous. I understand why the FBI has to be careful. You don't know what's on the premises when you're doing a surprise search. But the level that they did it, the way they destroyed the house, that was sending a message to Puff Daddy and to his kids. And again, that's why you hire lawyers that aren't shrinking violets. I don't care what they're going to do to the father and the sons. If you're going to convict them, you're going to have to, be at your best if you want to win the trial, because we're not going to just go easy. I thought that it was wrong how heavy-handed they were, but this is, the government isn't always right, Frank. Just because somebody might be unpopular does not mean that you get to violate their rights. And it was too much with Puff Daddy and his kids.
Let me let you go, Jeff. Next time we do this, either here or on the radio, want to get more into what's happening at Colombia, which I know you've been involved in, and at the Middle East. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Want to encourage everybody to check out Beyond the Legal Limit, one of the most fiery, interesting podcasts on a wide variety of subjects, which does a great job blending current events and some great stories from your past, as only you can tell them. Jeffrey, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Frank.
Thank you. If you want to, I'm going to sign off here. You want to do us a favor, you can absolutely share this wherever it's being seen. And if you want to make sure you never miss another podcast, go to wabcradio.com/Frank, and you can absolutely check out the podcast then. If you want to see a lot of other exclusive content like this, become a supporter of what we're doing on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/become supporter/Morano fan. And it's only 99 cents a month. It is not, it's the best value you're going to get anywhere. Those of you that are watching this on Facebook, you can just, as Brandon describes there, click the overview button under the comments box, then scroll to the bottom and click the subscribe button. I can promise you, you will not be disappointed. At least I hope you're not. Maybe you will be, but what does it cost you? 99 cents a month? I mean, so what? I mean, it's not a lot of money. So just subscribe. Please send this video elsewhere. want people to see this, please subscribe to what we're doing on YouTube. That's free. Just find me on YouTube at Morano Vision. We'll put this video and other videos like it up there, Morano Vision. And if you want to email me with your feedback on this show, you can email me at frank.morano@redappleaudionetworks.com. That's frank.morano at redappleaudionetworks.com. Gene says, good interview, very interesting. Thank you. Robert says, a great interview. Thank you very much. Yeah, I didn't expect to spend as much time on some of these cases as we did, but the conversation goes where it goes. So I'm sorry we didn't have the chance to touch upon more issues, but we're just going to have to do it again soon. So, by the way, tomorrow I had anticipated having on Paul Manafort in one of these chats, but Paul Manafort needed to reschedule. So we will not be chatting with Paul Manafort tomorrow. That's probably going to be one day next week, but we'll have some other good stuff here. So please be sure to like the page. Please be sure to share this. And if you're watching on Facebook, send stars. If you're watching on Twitter, retweet. If you're watching on YouTube, click like and be sure to subscribe. All right. That's it for me. I'll see you on the radio.